Racist cop shaved a black woman's head in court, then froze when she took the bench. The morning sun hung low over Atlanta, its pale light filtering through ancient oak trees that guarded the steps of the federal courthouse. Adrienne Carter, a black woman in her late 40s, stepped out of her Navy sedan, her silver curls tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her Navy blazer hugged her frame, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. She wasn't wearing her judicial robe, not yet. She never did outside the courtroom. To Adrienne, entering as a citizen, not a judge, was a quiet act of defiance in a system that hadn't always welcomed people like her. But today, that choice would cost her. In minutes, she'd be dragged into a windowless room, pinned to a chair, and stripped of her dignity by those sworn to uphold justice. They thought she was nobody, a black woman with no power, no voice. They were wrong. Adrienne Carter was a federal judge, and the storm of justice she was about to unleash would shake the foundations of this courthouse. This isn't just a story of a courtroom. It's a reckoning, a fight for civil rights that will leave no one untouched. Stick around, you won't believe what happens next. Before diving deeper into this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know where you're watching from, and if stories like these touch your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments section and consider subscribing to my channel. The tension builds in the middle of the story, leading to an unforgettable ending, so don't miss a moment. Tomorrow I have another special story waiting just for you. Adrienne's heels clicked softly against the courthouse steps, each step a steady rhythm of purpose. At 48, she'd clawed her way through a world that often doubted her, from a law student dismissed as diversity hire to a federal judge whose rulings commanded respect. Her silver curls, meticulously cared for, were more than hair. They were a crown of history braided with the resilience of her grandmother's stories and the pride of her mother's fight for civil rights. Today, she carried that legacy into the courthouse, her portfolio stuffed with notes for a high-profile police misconduct hearing. She adjusted her blazer, squared her shoulders, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. Inside, the air was cool, tinged with the sterile scent of polished marble. The security checkpoint buzzed with morning activity, lawyers shuffling briefcases, clerks whispering over coffee. Adrienne approached the metal detector, her expression calm but observant. That's when the energy shifted. Jack Sullivan, a courthouse bailiff in his early 50s, stood at the checkpoint, his thick forearms crossed, eyes narrowing as she neared. His face, weathered by years of unchallenged authority, carried a smirk that Adrienne had seen too many times before. To him, she wasn't a judge. She was just another black woman in a space where power didn't belong to her, ma'am. Sullivan said, his voice rough as gravel, step out of line. Random check. Adrienne paused, her brow lifting slightly. Is there an issue, officer? She asked her. Tone even but firm. Sullivan didn't answer. His gaze raked over her from her silver curls to her pressed slacks, lingering with a disdain that felt like a physical weight. Something about her confidence, her audacity to look like she belonged, grated on him. He stepped closer, gloved hand raised, no ID displayed. You can't just stroll into a federal building looking like that. Adrienne reached into her blazer, pulling out her federal credentials. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but Sullivan barely glanced at it. He snatched it, stuffed it into his pocket, and leaned in. You in a hurry, sweetheart? The word landed like a slap. A younger guard. A woman with nervous eyes shifted uncomfortably by the X-ray machine. She knew something was wrong, but stayed silent. Adrienne's jaw tightened. I need to get to a courtroom, she said, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. Then you'll follow my procedure. Sullivan snapped before she could respond, his heavy hand clamped onto her arm, steering her toward a side hallway. The corridor was dim, the hum of the courthouse fading behind them. He pushed open a door to a windowless screening room, the air inside cold and still. A steel chair sat in the center, a cart of scanning equipment nearby, and a pair of clippers glinted on the edge. Adrienne's heart thudded, but her face remained unreadable. I don't consent to this, she said, each word deliberate. You have no legal cause to detain me. You're acting suspicious, Sullivan growled, motioning to the chair. Sit. She didn't move. Two other officers entered, one grabbing her wrist, the other hovering by the door. Adrienne's voice rose sharp and clear. This is a violation. I want your names. No one answered. Instead, Sullivan picked up the clippers. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her pulse racing. "Standard protocol," he said, gesturing to her hair. "Could be hiding something in that mess?" The clippers buzzed to life, a swarm of steel against her scalp. Adrienne's breath caught as the first coil of silver hair fell to the floor. Then another. The officers laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Looks better already," one muttered. Sullivan wiped loose strands from his sleeve. "Should have come in with some respect." Adrienne's fists clenched in her lap. Knuckles pale, but she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stared straight ahead, memorizing every face, every word. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low. A promise carved in stone. Sullivan smirked. "People like you always say that." He opened the door, gesturing to the hall. "You're free to go courtrooms that way." Adrienne stood, her hands trembling only slightly. She retrieved her badge from his desk without a word and walked out, her steps deliberate. The hallway stretched before her, clerks glancing her way, then quickly looking down. Her scalp burned the weight of her loss, sinking in her hair, her dignity, her history. But beneath the pain, something fiercer burned purpose. She wasn't here to observe or defend. She was here to judge. And as she approached the courtroom doors, the storm of justice gathered strength within her. The courthouse hallway stretched long and silent, its marble floors reflecting the faint glow of overhead lights. Adrienne Carter's heels clicked with purpose, each step a defiance against the violation still burning on her scalp. Her silver curls, once a crown of pride, were gone, replaced by uneven patches that prickled under the cool air. Her navy blazer hung heavy on her shoulders, but her spine stayed straight, her portfolio clutched like a shield. She could still hear the buzz of the clippers, the coarse laughter of Jack Sullivan and his men echoing in her ears. They thought they'd broken her, stripped her of power. They were wrong. Adrienne wasn't just another citizen walking these halls. She was a federal judge, and today she'd make them see it. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, twin slabs of oak that hid a battle waiting to unfold. Beyond them, a high-profile police misconduct hearing was set to begin a case that had already drawn national eyes. Adrienne was supposed to enter through the private chambers, slip into her robe, and take the bench with decorum. But decorum felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. She pushed the doors open, the creak of hinges slicing through the hum of the courtroom. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, lawyers, journalists, plaintiffs, defendants, all frozen as Adrienne walked past the gallery. Her shoes echoed on the marble, a steady drum beat in the silence. Some stared in confusion, others in disbelief, their eyes lingering on her shorn scalp, the raw patches glinting under the lights. At the front, the judge's bench sat empty, a throne of dark wood waiting for its rightful occupant. Adrienne stepped behind it, her movements deliberate, and turned to face the room. The realization rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. This woman, the one they'd seen escorted through the halls like a suspect, wasn't a victim. She was the judge. Jack Sullivan stood by the side door, his bailiff badge glinting on his chest. When Adrienne's gaze met his, the smirk vanished from his face. His lips parted, but no sound came. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale as the marble beneath his boots. He shifted his hands, twitching at his belt, as if he could will the moment to rewind. Adrienne didn't flinch. She reached for the judicial robe folded over the arm of her chair, slipping it on with slow, deliberate grace. The black fabric settled over her shoulders like armor, transforming her from a wounded citizen to a pillar of justice. She turned to the court clerk, a young woman whose eyes darted nervously. "Is the docket ready?" Adrienne asked, her voice steady as steel. The clerk's voice cracked. "Yes, Your Honor." Adrienne nodded, once lowering herself into the leather chair. It groaned softly beneath her, a quiet acknowledgement of her presence. The room seemed to hold its breath. "We will begin with preliminary testimony on case 4921B, United States versus Atlanta Police Department." She said, her words cutting through the tension. "Charges of abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations. All parties present." A murmur of "Yes, Your Honor" echoed back, but the attorneys shifted in their seats, some wide-eyed, others avoiding her gaze. They'd heard whispers of what happened in the screening room. Some looked guilty, others angry that a black woman dared to sit in judgment after what they assumed had crushed her. Adrienne ignored them all. The first witness, a retired teacher who'd been shoved to the ground during a protest, took the stand. His voice trembled as he described the officer's knee on his back, the crack of his ribs. Adrienne listened, her pen scratching notes, her face a mask of precision, but inside a fire burned. Every word from the witness felt like an echo of her own humiliation, a reminder of why she was here. From the corner of her eye, she saw Sullivan inching toward the rear of the courtroom, his boots scuffing the floor. He looked like a man who wanted to disappear, who knew his reckoning was coming. He was right. Across the room, a young court staffer named Maya Torres watched from the sidelines. Maya, barely 25, had seen the whole thing unfold at the checkpoint. Sullivan's sneer, Adrienne's forced march to the screening room. She'd stood, frozen, her heart pounding, too afraid to speak up. Now guilt gnawed at her. Maya clutched a stack of files, her knuckles pale. She'd always played by the rules, kept her head down to survive in a courthouse where black and brown staffers were often overlooked. But Adrienne's presence behind the bench stirred something in her. As the witness stepped down, Maya slipped into the hallway, her pulse racing. She found Adrienne's clerk and whispered, "If the judge needs me, if she needs someone to back her up, I saw it all." Outside, the first ripples of the morning's events were spreading. A janitor who'd overheard the laughter in the screening room texted a friend. The friend posted it online, a single line that lit up social media. "Black woman assaulted in Atlanta. Courthouse turns out she's the judge." Hashtags like "Shiduri Justice for Adrienne" began to trend. Though Adrienne herself remained unaware, her focus locked on the courtroom. The gallery buzzed with whispers, reporters typing furiously, their laptops glowing in the dim light. A woman in the back, her hands clasped tightly, mouthed a silent prayer. The air felt electric, charged with the weight of what was unfolding. Adrienne called the next witness, her voice unwavering. But as she scanned the room, her eyes landed briefly on Sullivan. He froze under her gaze, his hands trembling slightly. She didn't linger, not yet. The real confrontation was coming, and she was building her case brick by brick. In her mind, she saw the faces of those who'd come before her. Her grandmother denied a vote. Her mother spat on during a sit-in. Their strength coursed through her, now a reminder that this wasn't just about her. It was about every person silenced by systemic racism, every cry for justice buried under bureaucracy. As the witness began to speak, Adrienne's pen paused. She wasn't just presiding over a case. She was setting the stage for a revolution. And the courthouse, whether it knew it or not, would never be the same. The courtroom pulsed with a restless energy, its high ceilings amplifying every rustle of paper and whispered word. Adrienne Carter sat behind the bench, her judicial robe, a stark contrast to the raw patches on her scalp still tingling from the morning's assault. The weight of her role as a federal judge pressed against her, but so did the fire in her chest, a fire fueled by the memory of Jack Sullivan's clippers, his mocking laughter, and the system that let men like him thrive. The police misconduct hearing marched on each witness, peeling back layers of abuse and civil rights violations that mirrored her own humiliation. But Adrienne's mind was elsewhere, circling a single truth. What happened to her wasn't a random act. It was a symptom of something deeper, something rotten within the courthouse walls. As she listened to a young protester describe being tackled by police, her eyes flicked to the gallery where whispers were growing louder. Outside, Atlanta's streets were stirring, and inside, secrets were beginning to claw their way into the light. The protester's voice cracked as he recounted his story, how an officer's baton had left him with a fractured wrist, how his cries for help were ignored. Adrienne's pen moved steadily, capturing every detail, but her thoughts drifted to the courthouse itself. This was supposed to be a temple of justice, yet it had harbored her violation just hours ago. She glanced at Jack Sullivan, still posted by the side door, his face a mask of forced neutrality. His eyes darted toward the exit as if he could sense the noose of accountability. Tightening, Adrienne's gaze shifted to the clerk, then to the attorneys, wondering who else knew. Who else had turned a blind eye to men like Sullivan? The answer came sooner than she expected. As the court recessed, Adrienne retreated to her chambers, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the city beyond her window. She sank into her chair, her fingers brushing the uneven patches on her scalp. The memory of the screening room surged back, the cold steel chair, the buzz of the clippers, the laughter that cut deeper than any blade. She closed her eyes, willing the images away, when a soft knock broke the silence. Her clerk, a wiry man named Daniel, stepped inside, his face pale. "Your Honor," he said, his voice low, "this was left for you?" He handed her a plain manila envelope, unmarked, its edges creased as if handled in haste. Adrienne's pulse quickened. She nodded, and Daniel slipped out, leaving her alone with the mystery. She tore open the envelope, her hands steady despite the unease curling in her gut. Inside was a thin stack of documents, photocopies of complaints filed against Jack Sullivan over the past 15 years. 12 formal reports, each one detailing harassment, excessive force, or racial discrimination. Names, dates, and signatures lined the pages, but one name appeared again and again. Judge Walter Grayson, a retired federal judge who'd once mentored Adrienne. Her breath caught Grayson with his polished speeches, and warm smiles had signed off on dismissing every single complaint. Allegation unsubstantiated, one read. Lack of corroborating evidence, said another. The words blurred before her eyes, each dismissal a brick in the wall that had protected Sullivan for decades. Adrienne leaned back, the documents trembling in her hands. Grayson had been her guide into the federal circuit, the one who'd told her she could change the system from within. Now his signature mocked her, a betrayal carved in ink. But there was more. Tucked at the back was a handwritten note scrawled in black ink. Check Grayson's meetings with Sullivan. It's not just him. No signature, no hint of the sender. Adrienne's mind raced. Was this a trap? A warning or a crack in the courthouse's armor? She folded the note, tucking it into her blazer. Whoever sent this knew something. Something that could unravel the systemic racism festering in these halls. Back in the courthouse, Maya Torres lingered near the records room, her heart pounding. She'd seen the envelope delivered, had overheard Daniel's hushed instructions to keep it quiet. Maya, a low-level staffer with dreams of law school, had spent years navigating the courthouse's unspoken rules. Smile, stay, invisible, survive. But this morning, watching Adrienne endure Sullivan's cruelty had shaken her. She'd stood by silent, and the guilt was eating her alive. Now she hovered near a filing cabinet, pretending to sort papers, while her mind replayed a memory, a late-night meeting she'd stumbled upon months ago. Sullivan and Grayson, heads bent together in a dimly lit office, their voices low. She hadn't caught the words, but the tension in the room had been palpable. Maya's hands trembled as she debated telling Adrienne. Speaking up could cost her job, or worse, outside the city was waking up to the story. The janitor's text had spiraled into a viral post now shared thousands of times across social media. Shortier justice for Adrienne trended alongside grainy courthouse photos, sparking outrage. Reporters gathered on the steps, their cameras flashing as protesters began to arrive, signs in hand. End systemic racism. Now inside, Adrienne returned to the courtroom, her robe heavy with purpose. The next witness, a mother whose son had been beaten during a traffic stop, spoke with quiet fury, her words slicing through the room. Adrienne listened, but her thoughts were on the envelope. If Grayson was involved, who else was complicit? How deep did this corruption run? As the testimony ended, Adrienne's eyes found Sullivan again. He was sweating now, his fingers fidgeting with his badge. She didn't smile, didn't glare. Just watched, letting him feel the weight of her presence. But another figure caught her attention, a senior judge, Robert Klein, seated in the gallery. Klein had been Grayson's closest ally, a fixture in the courthouse's old guard. His presence wasn't unusual, but the way he avoided her gaze sent a chill down her spine. Adrienne's grip tightened on her gavel. The documents, the note, Klein's unease. It all pointed to a truth she wasn't ready to face. The assault on her wasn't just Sullivan's doing. It was part of a machine, one that had been running long before she took the bench. And now that machine was watching her, waiting to see how far she'd go. The Atlanta federal courthouse stood like a fortress under the midday sun, but inside the air crackled with tension. Adrienne Carter presided over the police misconduct, hearing her judicial robe a shield against the raw vulnerability of her shorn scalp. The morning's assault, Jack Sullivan's clippers, his cruel laughter lingered like a bruise, but Adrienne's face betrayed nothing. Her pen scratched notes as a witness. A college student recounted being tear-gassed during a peaceful protest, his voice thick with anger. Each testimony chipped away at the myth of justice, exposing a system riddled with abuse and systemic racism. But Adrienne's mind was split half on the case, half on the manila envelope now hidden in her chambers. Those documents, 12 buried complaints against Sullivan, all dismissed by Judge Walter Grayson, hinted at a conspiracy that reached deeper than she'd imagined. As the courtroom hummed with restless energy, Adrienne knew she was no longer just judging a case. She was unraveling a machine, and the machine was starting to push back. The student stepped down, his eyes meeting Adrienne's for a fleeting moment, a silent plea for justice. She nodded, her expression steady, but her pulse quickened. The gallery was packed now. Reporters scribbling, activists whispering, their phones buzzing with updates. Outside, the crowd was growing, protesters chanting, "No justice, no peace," as news of Adrienne's assault spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with "Shocker Justice for Adrienne," alongside videos of the courthouse steps where signs demanded an end to civil rights violations. Adrienne felt the weight of their voices, a chorus urging her forward, but also a reminder of the stakes. She glanced at Jack Sullivan, still stationed by the side door. His face was a mask of defiance, but his hands betrayed him, fidgeting with his belt. He knew the tide was turning. As the court recessed, Adrienne's phone buzzed in her chambers, a text from an unknown number. "Drop this or you'll regret it." Her breath caught the words searing into her mind. She deleted the message, but its shadow lingered. Who knew enough to threaten her, Sullivan, Grayson, or someone higher up? She stood pacing the small room, her fingers brushing the uneven patches on her scalp. The memory of the screening room surged back, the cold chair, the buzz of the clippers, the laughter that stripped her bare. She'd survived it, but now the fight was escalating, and she wasn't sure how far it would go. A knock interrupted her thoughts. It was her sister Lena, who slipped inside, her face etched with worry. Lena, a nurse with a no-nonsense edge, had always been Adrienne's anchor. "You okay, Lena?" asked, her eyes scanning Adrienne's shorn head. Adrienne forced a smile. "I'm fine," but Lena wasn't buying it. "You're not fine. The whole city's talking about what happened, and now you're taking on the entire courthouse. Adrienne, this is dangerous. You've got a daughter to think about." Adrienne's chest tightened at the mention of her teenage daughter, Zoe, who was staying with relatives. "I can't stop Lena," she said softly. "If I do, nothing changes. Not for me, not for Zoe, not for anyone." Lena sighed, her voice breaking. "Just be careful. Promise me." Adrienne nodded, but the promise felt hollow. Careful wasn't an option anymore. Back in the courtroom, the next witness took the stand. A former courthouse employee named Carla Evans, a black woman in her 50s with a steely gaze. Carla's testimony was a bombshell. "I filed complaints against Sullivan myself," she said, her voice steady. "Harassment, racial slurs, intimidation. Everyone was buried. They told me it was handled, but nothing changed." Adrienne leaned forward, her pen pausing. "Who dismissed those complaints?" "Miss Evans." Carla's eyes flicked to the gallery, where Judge Robert Klein sat, his face unreadable. "Judge Grayson signed off," she said, but he wasn't alone. Orders came from higher up. A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters typing furiously. Adrienne's heart pounded. Higher up, the note in the envelope echoed in her mind. "It's not just him." The defense attorney, a slick man in a pinstripe suit named Paul Whitaker, rose to object. "Your Honor, this testimony is irrelevant to the case at hand, and given this morning's incident, we question your impartiality." The gallery bristled, a low hum of outrage. Adrienne's gaze sharpened, cutting through Whitaker's smug demeanor. "Counselor," she said, her voice a blade, "are you suggesting that because I was assaulted for being a black woman, I can't uphold justice? If anything, that experience makes me uniquely qualified to see through excuses like yours." The room stilled, Whitaker's jaw tightening. "Sit down," Adrienne added, her tone final. He did, but the pressure wasn't just in the courtroom. Maya Torres, the young staffer who'd witnessed Adrienne's assault, hovered near the records room, her hands shaking. She'd promised to help Adrienne, but fear gnawed at her. Speaking up could end her career, or worse. Yet the memory of Adrienne's calm defiance behind the bench stirred something in her. Maya slipped into a quiet corner, pulling out her phone. She typed a quick message to a friend, a courthouse intern. "I saw what Sullivan did to the judge. I'm scared, but I can't stay silent. She hit send unaware that her words would soon leak online, fueling the growing storm. Outside the protests, swelled voices rising in a chant. End courthouse corruption, news vans lined the street cameras, capturing the sea of signs and faces. Black, white, young, old united in their demand for change. Inside, Adrienne called the next witness, her mind racing. The documents Carla's testimony, the anonymous threat, they all pointed to a network of power protecting Sullivan Grayson. And who knew how many others Judge Klein's presence in the gallery felt like a warning, his silence louder than any objection? As the witness began to speak, Adrienne's eyes drifted to her gavel, its weight a reminder of her authority and her responsibility. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every voice silenced by the system, every cry for justice dismissed. But with each step forward, the shadows grew darker and the question loomed. How far would her enemies go to stop her? The Atlanta federal courthouse thrummed with an electric tension, its marble halls echoing with the weight of unfolding history. Adrienne Carter sat behind the bench, her judicial robe cloaking the raw wounds of her morning assault. Jack Sullivan's clippers, his cruel laughter, the theft of her silver curls. The police misconduct hearing pressed on each witness, exposing the rot of systemic racism and abuse of power in the city's law enforcement. But Adrienne's focus was razor-sharp split between the case and the manila envelope hidden in her chambers. Those documents, 12 buried complaints against Sullivan, dismissed by Judge Walter Grayson, had cracked open a door to a deeper conspiracy. Now, as the courtroom filled with reporters, activists, and a restless gallery, Adrienne sensed the stakes rising. Outside protests roared, and inside a single piece of evidence was about to turn the tide of justice in a way no one saw coming. The current witness, a paramedic who treated injured protesters, spoke with quiet precision, describing officers ignoring pleas for help. Adrienne's pen moved steadily, but her mind churned. The anonymous threat, "Drop this or you'll regret it," still burned in her memory, a shadow that followed her every move. She glanced at Sullivan stationed by the side door, his face a mix of defiance and unease. His eyes darted to Judge Robert Klein in the gallery, a silent exchange that didn't escape Adrienne's notice. Klein, Grayson's old ally, sat with a rigid posture, his presence a reminder of the power she was challenging. The air felt heavy, charged with the unspoken question, how far would this machine go to protect itself? As the paramedic stepped down, a soft knock echoed from the chamber door. Adrienne's clerk Daniel slipped into the courtroom, his face pale as he handed her a small USB drive wrapped in a note. This came anonymously. "Your Honor," he whispered. "It's urgent." Adrienne's pulse quickened. She nodded, dismissing him, and tucked the drive into her robe. The note, scrawled in hurried ink, read, "Play this," it's Sullivan's voice. Her heart pounded. Was this a trap or the key to unraveling the courthouse's secrets? She called a brief recess, her voice calm, despite the storm brewing within. The gallery buzzed reporters, sensing something big, their phones lighting up with live updates. Justice for Adrienne trended higher, fueling protests that now spilled across downtown Atlanta. In her chambers, Adrienne plugged the USB into her laptop, her hands steady but her breath shallow. The file was a single audio clip, grainy but clear. Sullivan's voice filled the room, low and smug. "Grayson told me to keep things tight. No complaints get through, especially from their kind. We keep order no matter what." Another voice, muffled, responded, Grayson's unmistakable. "Just make sure it's clean. No paper trail." The clip ended abruptly, leaving Adrienne frozen. This wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a grenade, proof of a deliberate cover-up orchestrated by a man she'd once trusted. Grayson's betrayal cut deeper than Sullivan's clippers, a wound that bled trust and history. Back in the courtroom, Adrienne resumed the bench, the USB drive burning a hole in her pocket. The gallery was packed to capacity, the air thick with anticipation. She called the next witness but paused, her eyes sweeping the room. Sullivan stood rigid, his knuckles white. Klein shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on the floor. Adrienne's voice cut through the silence, sharp and deliberate. "Before we proceed, I'd like to enter new evidence into the record." The defense attorney, Paul Whitaker, shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Adrienne raised a hand, silencing him. Sit down, Counselor Justice. Doesn't wait for your convenience. She nodded to the clerk who connected the audio to the courtroom speakers. The room stilled as Sullivan's voice echoed his words, damning. No complaints get through, especially from their kind. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters typed furiously, their screens glowing. Sullivan's face went ashen, his body sagging against the wall. Whitaker stammered. This is inadmissible. No chain of custody, but Adrienne's gaze was unrelenting. The court will determine its admissibility, she said, her voice ablade. But the truth doesn't need your permission to be heard. She turned to the officers at the back. Escort Deputy Sullivan into custody. Now, the courtroom erupted, murmurs, shouts, cameras flashing. Sullivan lunged forward, his voice hoarse. You can't do this. I was following orders. The officers grabbed him, cuffs clicking around his wrists. Adrienne didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on his. You followed the wrong one, she said, her words slicing through the chaos. As Sullivan was dragged out the gallery, roared some cheering, others stunned into silence. Klein slipped out quietly, his absence louder than any protest. Adrienne's gavel fell, restoring order. But the room felt different now, alive with the pulse of a reckoning. Outside, the protests exploded, chants of justice for Adrienne, shaking the courthouse steps. News channels broke the story live, the audio clips spreading like wildfire across social media. But Adrienne's victory was short-lived. As the court adjourned, her phone buzzed again. A new message from the same unknown number. You've gone too far. Watch your back. Her stomach twisted, the threat landing like a fist. She deleted it, but the words lingered, a reminder that exposing Sullivan was only the beginning. The machine, Grayson Klein, and whoever else was still out there, and they weren't done fighting. In the records room, Maya Torres stood frozen, her phone clutched in her hand. She'd sent the USB drive, slipping it to Daniel during the recess. Her friend's leak had gone viral, and now the world knew what she'd seen, but fear gnawed at her. She'd crossed a line, and the courthouse's old guard wouldn't forgive betrayal. Maya glanced at the door, half expecting Sullivan's allies to barge in. Instead, she saw Adrienne's silhouette through the courtroom's glass doors, the judge's robe flowing like a banner. Maya's resolve hardened. She wasn't alone anymore. Adrienne stepped into the hallway, the weight of the audio clip still settling. The evidence had changed everything, but it also raised new questions. Who sent the drive? Why now? And how much deeper did this conspiracy run? As she passed a window, she saw the crowd outside, 100 strong, their signs a sea of defiance. They believed in her, but belief came with a cost. Adrienne's fingers tightened around her gavel, her mind racing. Sullivan was in cuffs, but the real battle was just beginning, and the shadows were closing in. The Atlanta Federal Courthouse stood bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon, but inside a storm was brewing. Adrienne Carter moved through the marble halls, her judicial robe trailing like a shadow of authority. The echo of Jack Sullivan's damning audio clip still reverberated his voice. Admitting to bearing complaints under Judge Walter Grayson's orders had turned the police misconduct hearing into a national spectacle. Sullivan was in cuffs, but Adrienne knew he was just a cog in a larger machine, one built on systemic racism and corruption. The anonymous threat, you've gone too far. Watch your back, hung over her like a blade, sharpening her resolve. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for justice. It was a battlefield, and Adrienne was ready to fight. Outside protests swelled their chants, shaking the city, while inside the courthouse's old guard watched her every move, waiting for her to falter. The gallery was overflowing as Adrienne took the bench, reporters cramming the back rows, their cameras trained on her. The air buzzed with anticipation. Justice for Adrienne trending worldwide as social media amplified the audio clip's impact. Protesters outside held signs reading "End Courthouse Corruption and Civil Rights." Now their voices a steady drumbeat against the courthouse walls. Adrienne's gaze swept the room, noting the absence of Judge Robert Klein, whose silent exit during Sullivan's arrest had left a chill in her spine. She tapped her gavel once the sound cutting through the tension. Court is now in session, she said, her voice steady but laced with fire. The next witness was called. But Adrienne's mind was on the bigger fight, the network of power that had protected Sullivan for years. The witness, a community organizer named Marcus Reed, spoke of police brutality during a voter registration drive, his words heavy with the weight of lived experience. Adrienne listened, her pen scratching notes, but her thoughts circled the manila envelope in the USB drive. The note. It's not just him, pointed to a conspiracy beyond Grayson and Sullivan's desperate outburst. I was following orders suggested others were involved. She glanced at the defense attorney, Paul Whitaker, whose polished facade was cracking. His objections were weaker now, his eyes darting to the empty seat where Klein had sat. Adrienne's instincts screamed, Klein knew something, and his absence was a signal that the machine was regrouping. As the testimony ended, Adrienne called a brief recess, retreating to her chambers. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in. She sank into her chair, her fingers brushing the raw patches on her scalp. The memory of Sullivan's clippers flared, but it was Grayson's betrayal that cut deeper. Her mentor, the man who championed her rise, had signed off on silencing victims like her. She pulled out the manila envelope, rereading the complaints. Each one a story of injustice buried under bureaucratic lies. A knock broke her thoughts. It was Maya Torres, the young staffer who'd sent the USB drive. Maya's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Your Honor, Maya whispered, closing the door behind her. I heard something. Sullivan's lawyer visited him in holding. He said Grayson wasn't alone, that there's a group of higher-ups who've been calling the shots for years. Adrienne's pulse quickened. Did he name anyone? Maya shook her head. Not yet, but I think they're scared Sullivan's talking, trying to save himself. Adrienne nodded, her mind racing. Thank you, Maya, but be careful. You're in deep now. Maya swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. I know, but after what they did to you, I couldn't stay silent. Adrienne's gaze softened, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. Maya was risking everything, and that courage fueled Adrienne's own. Back in the courtroom, Adrienne made a bold move. This court is expanding its inquiry, she announced, her voice ringing clear. Based on new evidence, I'm recommending a federal investigation into all complaints filed against courthouse personnel, starting with those dismissed by Judge Walter Grayson. The gallery erupted, gasps, murmurs, a few scattered cheers. Whitaker shot to his feet, his face red. Your Honor, this exceeds your authority. You're turning a hearing into a witch hunt. Adrienne's eyes locked onto his, unflinching. No, counselor, I'm turning a courtroom into a place where justice isn't just a word. Sit down. The room stilled, Whitaker slumping into his seat. Outside, the protests grew louder. News channels broadcasting Adrienne's words live. Social media lit up, activists and influencers amplifying her call for reform. But the victory was bittersweet. As the court adjourned, Adrienne's phone buzzed with another anonymous message. You can't stop us. Back off or your family pays. Her stomach twisted, the threat striking at her core. She thought of her daughter Zoe, safe with relatives but vulnerable. She deleted the message, her hands trembling, but the fear lingered. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every victim of this broken system, and the cost was rising. In the records room, Maya sat at her desk, her heart pounding. Her leak had sparked a fire, but now she was a target. She'd overheard a senior clerk whispering about cleaning up loose ends, and the words chilled her. She typed a quick note to Adrienne, slipping it under the judge's chamber door. They're watching me. Check Klein's old files. Maya's hands shook as she returned to her work, pretending nothing was wrong, but she knew the truth. She'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. Across town, Sullivan sat in a holding cell, his uniform replaced by a gray jumpsuit. His lawyer leaned close, his voice low. Tell them everything, he urged Grayson Klein. The others, it's your only way out. Sullivan's eyes flickered with fear and defiance. He'd been loyal to the machine for years, but now it was crumbling, and he wasn't going down alone. He nodded, his voice a rasp. Get me a deal, I'll talk. Adrienne stepped into the hallway. The courthouse quieter now as evening fell. The protests outside were a distant roar, their energy a lifeline. She clutched Maya's note, her mind racing. Klein's files could hold the key to exposing the network, but every step forward brought new dangers. The threats were real, the shadows closing in. As she passed a window, she saw her reflection, her shorn scalp, her tired eyes, her unbreakable resolve. She wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a beacon, and the machine would do anything to snuff her out. But Adrienne Carter didn't back down, and the fight for justice was far from over. The Atlanta federal courthouse loomed under a darkening sky, its marble facade a silent witness to the battle raging within. Adrienne Carter took her place behind the bench, her judicial robe a mantle of authority over the raw scars of her shorn scalp. The police misconduct hearing had become a crucible exposing not just abuses by law enforcement, but a deeper rot of systemic racism and corruption within the courthouse itself. Jack Sullivan's arrest, sparked by his damning audio confession, had cracked the machine wide open, but Adrienne knew the real power. Judge Walter Grayson and his allies, like Judge Robert Klein, was still out there watching, waiting. The anonymous threats "back off or your family pays" echoed in her mind. But Adrienne's resolve burned brighter than her fear. The courtroom was packed, the air electric with anticipation as she prepared to confront the heart of the conspiracy. Outside protests roared, and inside a single witness was about to ignite a firestorm. The gallery brimmed with reporters, activists, and citizens, their phones buzzing with live updates. Justice for Adrienne trended globally, fueling a sea of protesters outside their chants. No more cover-ups shaking the courthouse steps. Adrienne tapped her gavel, the sharp sound slicing through the tension. Court is now in session. She said, her voice a steady beacon in the storm. The next witness was called, but Adrienne's eyes scanned the room, noting Klein's absence again. His silence was a warning, a signal that the machine was regrouping. She clutched Maya Torres's note, checked Klein's old files hidden in her robe, its weight a reminder of the risks they were all taking. The witness, a soft-spoken woman named Evelyn Harris, stepped forward. Evelyn, a retired courthouse clerk in her 60s, had worked under Grayson for decades. Her hands trembled as she took the oath, but her eyes were steady, fixed on Adrienne. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Laura Chen, began. "Ms. Harris, can you confirm your role in the courthouse?" Evelyn nodded. "I was Grayson's personal clerk for 20 years. I handled his correspondence, his files, everything." Adrienne leaned forward, her pen pausing. "And were you aware of complaints against Deputy Jack Sullivan?" Chen asked. Evelyn's voice tightened. "Yes, dozens. Harassment, racial discrimination, intimidation. I logged them myself." The gallery stirred a low hum of shock. Chen pressed on. "What happened to those complaints?" Evelyn's gaze flicked to the empty seat where Klein had sat. "They were destroyed," she said, her words landing like a hammer. "Grayson ordered me to shred them. He said it was for the greater good to protect the courthouse's reputation." Gasps rippled through the room, reporters typing furiously. Adrienne's heart pounded, the pieces falling into place. Evelyn continued, her voice stronger now. "It wasn't just Grayson. Judge Klein signed off on the dismissals too. They had a system, complaints from black staff. Black visitors, anyone who didn't fit, never saw the light of day." The defense attorney, Paul Whitaker, shot to his feet, his face flushed. "Your Honor, this is hearsay, an attack on respected judges with no evidence." Adrienne's gaze was unrelenting, cutting through his bluster. "The witness is testifying under oath, counselor. If you have evidence to refute her present, otherwise sit down." Whitaker hesitated, then slumped into his seat, the gallery buzzing with approval. Adrienne turned to Evelyn, her voice calm but piercing. "Ms. Harris, did anyone else know about this system?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "Yes, senior staff, other judges. It was an open secret. They called it keeping order." The courtroom erupted shouts, murmurs, a few scattered cheers. Adrienne's gavel fell, silencing the chaos. Her mind raced. Evelyn's testimony wasn't just about Sullivan or Grayson. It was a window into a network of power that had silenced civil rights violations for decades. She glanced at Maya standing near the back, her face pale but resolute. Maya's courage, her leaked USB drive, her whispered tips had brought them here. But the cost was rising. Adrienne's phone, tucked in her robe, felt heavier, the memory of the latest threat. "Your family pays a constant shadow." As Evelyn stepped down, Adrienne made a decision. "This court is ordering an immediate review of all courthouse records tied to judges, Grayson and Klein," she announced, her voice ringing clear. "Every dismissed complaint, every shredded file will be recovered and investigated." The gallery roared, reporters scrambling to capture her words. Whitaker tried to object, but Adrienne cut him off. Enough, she said, her tone final. This isn't a witch hunt, counselor. It's accountability. Justice doesn't hide in shadows. The room stilled her words, a rallying cry. Outside, the protests exploded news channels, broadcasting Adrienne's order live. Social media surged with influencers and activists, hailing her as a hero for judicial reform, but the victory came with a price. As the court adjourned, Adrienne found a new note slipped under her chamber door, the handwriting chillingly familiar. You're digging your own grave. Stop now. Her stomach twisted, the threat striking at her core. She thought of her daughter Zoe and her sister Lena, both vulnerable to this faceless enemy. She crumpled the note, her hands trembling, but her resolve held firm. She wasn't backing down. In the records room, Maya sat at her desk, her heart racing. She'd overheard a senior clerk whispering about dealing with the leak, and the words chilled her. Her phone buzzed a message from her friend, the intern. They know it was you. Be careful. Maya's breath caught. She'd risked everything to help Adrienne, but now she was a target. She glanced at the door, half expecting Klein's allies to storm in. Instead, she saw Adrienne's silhouette through the courtroom's glass doors, the judge's robe, a symbol of defiance. Maya's fear hardened into purpose. She wasn't alone. Across town, in a dimly lit holding cell, Sullivan sat across from his lawyer, his face haggard. Grayson's not the top, he rasped. Klein's in deeper, and there's others, people you wouldn't believe. Get me a deal and I'll name them all. His lawyer nodded, scribbling notes. Sullivan's betrayal was a crack in the machine, but it came too late to save him. Adrienne stepped into the hallway, the courthouse quiet as night fell. The protests outside were a distant roar, their energy a lifeline. She clutched Maya's latest tip, Klein's files, and felt the weight of what lay ahead. The courtroom showdown had exposed the conspiracy, but it had also painted a target on her back. As she passed a window, she saw the city lights flickering, a reminder of the lives depending on her. The machine was wounded, but it wasn't dead, and Adrienne knew the next move would be the most dangerous yet. The Atlanta federal courthouse glowed under the evening lights, its marble walls a silent sentinel amid the chaos. Adrienne Carter stood behind her bench, the weight of her judicial robe heavier than ever, though her shorn scalp bore the scars of a fight far from over. The police misconduct hearing had spiraled into a national reckoning, exposing a web of systemic racism and corruption that reached from Jack Sullivan's Clippers to the highest ranks of the courthouse. Evelyn Harris's testimony, revealing Judge Walter Grayson and Judge Robert Klein's role in bearing complaints, had ignited a firestorm, and Adrienne's call for a federal investigation had shaken the system to its core. Outside protests thundered their chants of justice for Adrienne, echoing through the city, but the anonymous threats, "You're digging your own grave," loomed like a shadow, reminding her that every step forward came at a cost. As the courtroom emptied, Adrienne knew she wasn't just fighting for justice. She was forging a legacy, one that would outlast her. The gallery was a sea of faces, reporters, activists, citizens, each one watching Adrienne with a mix of awe and expectation. Social media pulsed with irony, justice for Adrienne, the hashtag now a global rallying cry for civil rights and judicial reform. News vans lined the streets broadcasting her every word while protesters outside waved signs. End systemic corruption and protect Black women. Adrienne tapped her gavel. The sound, a quiet anchor in the storm court, is adjourned for the day. She said, her voice steady but resonant, carrying the weight of history. The room rose, but no one rushed to leave. They lingered, whispering, some reaching out as if to touch the moment. A young Black law student in the front row clutched her notebook. Her eyes shining with resolve, Adrienne saw herself in her, a spark of the future. In her chambers, Adrienne removed her robe, hanging it carefully on the rack. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant roar of the protests. She sat at her desk, pulling out a single sheet of paper, a draft she'd been working on in secret. It was a policy proposal, bold and uncompromising, titled the Carter Mandate. It demanded comprehensive anti-bias training for all courthouse staff, mandatory psychological screenings, regular audits of complaint records, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Adrienne's pen hovered over the page, her mind racing. This wasn't just a response to Sullivan's assault or Grayson's betrayal. It was a blueprint to dismantle the systems that enabled them. She signed her name the ink, a vow to the countless voices silenced before her. A knock broke her focus. It was her sister Lena, her face a mix of pride and worry. "You're all over the news," Lena said, holding up her phone. A headline blared, "Judge Carter demands courthouse overhaul after exposing corruption." Adrienne managed a faint smile. "Good. Let them talk." Lena's expression softened, but her voice trembled. "I'm proud of you, but I'm scared, Adrienne. Those threats, Zoe's asking questions. What if they come for you?" Adrienne's chest tightened at the mention of her daughter. "I'm protecting Zoe by doing this," she said, her voice firm but laced with pain. "If I stop, her world stays broken." Lena nodded, tears in her eyes, and pulled Adrienne into a hug. "Just don't forget you're human, okay?" Adrienne held her tight, the warmth a reminder of what she was fighting for. Back in the courthouse, Maya Torres slipped into the records room, her heart pounding. Her role in leaking the USB drive and tipping Adrienne about Klein's files had made her a hero online, but a target within these walls. She'd overheard senior staff whispering about handling the problem, and the words chilled her. Maya sat at her desk pretending to work, but her eyes darted to the door. Her phone buzzed a message from her friend, the intern. "They're auditing your access logs. Get out." Maya's breath caught. She grabbed a flash drive with copies of Klein's files and slipped it into her pocket, her hands shaking. She wasn't just helping Adrienne anymore. She was part of the fight, and there was no turning back. Outside the protest grew a coalition of voices, black, white, young, old, demanding change. News broke that the Department of Justice had launched a federal probe into the courthouse, targeting Grayson Klein and their allies. Adrienne Carter's mandate was already circulating with civil rights groups praising its vision and conservative officials decrying it as overreach. In a quiet moment, Adrienne met with a group of black law students who'd come to thank her. One, a young woman named Kira, spoke softly. "You're why I'm here," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought the system would break me, but you're showing us it can bend." Adrienne's throat tightened. "It bends because we push," she said, her words a torch passed to the next generation. As night fell, Adrienne stood by her chamber window, watching the city pulse below. The protests were a symphony of hope and rage, their signs glowing under streetlights, but the latest threat still burned in her mind, a reminder that the machine wasn't done. She clutched the Carter mandate, its pages, a weapon forged from her pain. A knock came again, this time her clerk, Daniel, his face grim. "Your Honor, the DOJ wants to meet. They're moving fast on Grayson and Klein, but there's talk of pushback. Big names are circling." Adrienne nodded, her jaw tight. "Let them come," she said, her voice a quiet thunder. In a holding cell across town, Jack Sullivan sat, hunched, his eyes hollow. His lawyer leaned close, scribbling notes. "They're offering a deal," the lawyer said. "Name the higher-ups and you walk with less time." Sullivan's hands trembled. "Klein's just the start," he muttered. "There's a list. People who'll do anything to keep this quiet." His voice cracked, fear and betrayal mixing in his words. Adrienne stepped into the hallway, the courthouse, now a labyrinth of shadows. The protests outside were her armor, but the fight was far from won. Klein's files, Sullivan's whispers. The DOJ's probe all pointed to a deeper truth, one that could topple giants. As she passed a mirror, she saw her reflection, her shorn scalp, her tired eyes, her unbreakable spirit. The Carter mandate was her legacy, but it was also her challenge to the world. Justice wasn't a dream, it was a demand. And as the city roared, Adrienne knew the next battle would test her like never before. The Atlanta Federal Courthouse stood resolute under a dawn sky, its marble walls catching the first rays of light. Adrienne Carter walked through its quiet halls, her judicial robe folded over her arm, the weight of her fight etched into every step. The police misconduct hearing had ended with a seismic shift. Jack Sullivan's conviction for abuse of power and civil rights violations, coupled with Adrienne's call for a federal probe into Judges Walter Grayson and Robert Klein, had exposed a courthouse conspiracy rooted in systemic racism. Her Carter mandate, a bold policy to reform the courts, was now a beacon for change, praised by activists and debated fiercely by the old guard. Outside protests still pulsed their chants, a heartbeat for justice, while numbers for justice for Adrienne lit up screens worldwide. But the anonymous threats, "You're digging your own grave," lingered, a reminder that Adrienne's victory was not the end, only a beginning. As she prepared for a new chapter, the scars on her shorn scalp told a story of resilience, and the fire in her heart burned brighter than ever. The courtroom was silent now, its gallery empty. The echoes of yesterday's chaos faded. Adrienne stood alone at the bench, her fingers tracing the wood where her gavel rested. The hearing's final ruling had been clear. Sullivan would serve 7 years with additional charges pending for Grayson and Klein. Adrienne had ordered a full review of every buried complaint, giving voice to victims long silenced. The Department of Justice's probe was underway, and whispers of Sullivan's plea deal, naming higher-ups in the courthouse machine, hinted at more revelations to come. But Adrienne's thoughts were on the Carter mandate. It wasn't just a policy, it was a promise to rebuild a system that had failed too many for too long. A soft knock broke the silence. It was Lena, her sister, carrying a small mirror and a pair of clippers. "You ready, Lena?" asked, her voice warm but steady. Adrienne met her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability passing between them. The uneven patches on her scalp, a brutal reminder of Sullivan's assault, had begun to grow out. But they were a jagged scar she no longer wanted to carry. Ascendant Adrienne nodded. "Let's finish it," she said, her voice soft but resolute. Lena moved slowly, the clippers humming gently, each pass, deliberate, freeing Adrienne of the last traces of that morning's violation. When it was done, Lena handed her the mirror. Adrienne looked at her reflection, bold, bare, strong. "You could walk into any room and own it," Lena said with a grin. Adrienne's lips curved a rare smile. "This is who I've always been," she said, her voice a quiet vow. "Now the world's catching up." The moment was interrupted by a call from her clerk, Daniel. "Your Honor, the White House is on the line," he said, his voice tight with awe. "They want you in D.C. for the Presidential Medal of Justice." Adrienne's breath caught. The honor was monumental, a recognition of her fight for civil rights and judicial reform. But it wasn't about her. It was for every victim who'd been silenced, every voice she'd helped amplify. She nodded. "Tell them I'm coming," she said, her tone firm. The ceremony would be a platform, a chance to push the Carter mandate further, to demand systemic change on a national stage. Outside, the protests had calmed, but their spirit lingered. Atlanta's streets were alive with murals and signs. "Justice starts now." Carter mandate, a testament to the movement Adrienne had sparked. Social media buzzed with tributes from activists to senators, all hailing her as a hero. But Adrienne's focus was closer to home. She met Maya Torres in the courthouse library, the young staffer who'd risked everything to leak the USB drive. In Klein's files, Maya, now applying to law school, stood taller, her fear replaced by purpose. "You changed everything," Maya said, her voice thick. Adrienne shook her head. "We did. You, me, those people outside. This is our fight." Maya's eyes shone a spark of the future Adrienne was building. Later, Adrienne visited her daughter Zoe at her aunt's house. Zoe, 16 and fierce, threw her arms around her mother. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Adrienne held her tight, the weight of the threats. "Your family pays," fading in the warmth of her daughter's embrace. "This is for you," Adrienne said, her voice steady. "So you never have to fight the way I did." Zoe nodded, her eyes bright with the same fire that drove her mother in her chambers. Adrienne reviewed the DOJ's latest report. Sullivan's plea deal had named Klein and 2 other officials, with more expected to fall. The Carter mandate was gaining traction, adopted by several districts with a bill in Congress to make it law. But resistance loomed. Conservative judges and lobbyists were pushing back, calling it radical. Adrienne didn't flinch. She'd faced worse than their words as she packed for D. Adrienne glanced at a photo on her desk, her grandmother, a civil rights marcher, smiling in a faded sepia frame. "We're still walking," Nana Adrienne murmured, her voice a quiet prayer. She slipped the Carter mandate into her briefcase, its pages a weapon forged from pain and purpose. The White House awaited, but so did the next battle. Adrienne stepped into the hallway, her head bare and unapologetic, her stride unbroken. Across town, in a stark prison cell, Jack Sullivan sat hunched, a muted TV playing in the corner. The screen showed Adrienne's face, a news ticker announcing her medal. He stared, his hands trembling as the woman he'd tried to break stood poised to reshape the nation. The silence in the cell was heavy, not punishment, but truth, and truth was a weight he couldn't escape. Adrienne walked out of the courthouse, the city lights glinting off the marble steps. A small crowd lingered, protesters, students, elders, all watching her with quiet reverence. An older woman, her face lined with years, stepped forward, placing a hand on Adrienne's arm. "You're our judge," she said, her voice trembling. Adrienne took her hand, warmth passing between them. "We're all judges now," she said, her words a call to rise. As she stepped into the night, the stars above seemed brighter, a promise that the light of justice, once kindled, could never be dimmed. The Atlanta Federal Courthouse faded into the distance as Adrienne Carter's plane lifted off bound for Washington, D.C. The marble halls where she'd faced Jack Sullivan's Clippers exposed a conspiracy of systemic racism and birthed the Carter Mandate now felt like a chapter closing, but not the story's end. Her shorn scalp, once a wound, was now a badge of resilience. Her bare head held high under the weight of the Presidential Medal of Justice awaiting her. The police misconduct hearing had convicted Sullivan, launched a federal probe into judges Walter Grayson and Robert Klein, and sparked a movement that echoed across the nation. Outside Atlanta's protests had quieted, but their spirit lived in murals, hashtags, and a new bill in Congress to enshrine her mandate. The anonymous threats, "You're digging your own grave," still lingered, a reminder of the machine's lingering claws, but Adrienne's fire burned brighter. As the Capitol's lights glittered below, she wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a symbol, a line in the sand for justice, and her legacy was only beginning. The White House East Room glowed with history, its chandeliers casting a warm light over rows of dignitaries, activists, and reporters. Adrienne stood at the podium, the Presidential Medal of Justice heavy around her neck, its gold gleaming against her tailored suit. The crowd, senators, civil rights leaders, and ordinary citizens watched in rapt silence, cameras broadcasting her words to millions. Among them sat her sister Lena, her daughter Zoe, and Maya Torres, now a law student, their faces radiant with pride. In the corner, a quiet girl from a middle school Adrienne had visited months ago clutched a notebook. Her question? "Do you still believe in the system?" answered in the woman before her. Adrienne's voice, steady and resonant, filled the room. "I wasn't supposed to be here." She began, her words cutting through the stillness. "Not because I didn't earn it, but because systems like this one weren't built for people like me. A black woman, a daughter of marchers, a believer in justice over order." The crowd leaned in, hanging on her every word. "When I walked into that courthouse, they saw my skin, not my robe, and they tried to break me. They shaved my head, laughed, and thought I'd shrink. But I stood, I spoke, and I made them see me." Her voice rose a quiet thunder. "This medal isn't mine alone. It belongs to every woman told to stay silent, every man denied justice, every child who saw fear instead of fairness in the law. This is for you." The applause was deep, respectful, a wave of recognition for a truth long overdue. Adrienne paused, her eyes finding Zoe's, then Maya's, then the girls in the corner. "The Carter Mandate isn't just a policy," she continued. "It's a demand that our courts reject systemic racism, that they serve every voice, not just the powerful. We're not asking for change, we're building it." The room erupted again, cameras flashing, social media exploding with "Rar Carter Mandate" and "Yamari Justice for All." Reporters typed furiously, knowing her words would shape headlines for weeks. As the ceremony ended, Adrienne stepped off the stage, Lena pulling her into a tearful embrace. "You did it," Lena whispered. Adrienne shook her head. "We're doing it, and we're not done." Zoe joined them, her fierce pride a mirror of her mother's strength. Maya approached, her law school acceptance letter in hand. "You're why I'm going to be a lawyer," she said, her voice steady. Adrienne smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're why I kept going." The quiet girl from the middle school stepped forward, shyly offering her notebook inside a single line. "Be like Judge Carter." Adrienne's throat tightened, her fingers tracing the words. "Keep asking the hard questions," she told the girl. "That's how we win." Back in Atlanta, the courthouse was quieter now, but its halls felt different, alive with a new stillness, one born of accountability. The Carter Mandate had spread, adopted by districts across the country, its principles debated in Congress. The DOJ's probe had widened with Sullivan's plea deal, naming Klein and 3 other officials, their resignations shaking the system. Protests had evolved into organizing with community groups, drafting local reforms inspired by Adrienne's fight. But resistance lingered. Conservative pundits called her divisive, and whispers of new threats surfaced, though none could dim her light in a state prison far from the capital. Jack Sullivan sat in his cell, a muted TV flickering in the corner. The screen showed Adrienne accepting her medal, her voice a distant echo. "We're building it." He stared unblinking the woman he'd tried to break now, a national hero. The silence in the cell was suffocating. Not punishment, but truth. A truth he'd never outrun. His hands, once steady with clippers, trembled now, empty of power. Adrienne returned to Atlanta days later, stepping into the courthouse with a different stride, not louder but fuller, like someone who'd remembered her own height. The staff greeted her differently too. A janitor's nod, a security guard's subtle thumbs up, a clerk's quiet, "Thank you." The courtroom, once a place of fear, now held presence. Adrienne took her bench for a new case, a routine civil dispute, but her rulings carried a deeper intent. Every decision was a brick in the foundation. She was laying a system where justice wasn't a privilege, but a right. One afternoon, Adrienne visited the middle school again, invited to speak about courage. The room was packed, kids holding signs, "Be like Judge Carter." Their questions were raw. "How do you face hate?" "Did you ever want to quit?" She answered honestly, but the quiet girl's question lingered. "Do you still believe in the system?" Adrienne smiled, her voice soft but sure. "I believe in what it can become because of people like you." The girl nodded, her notebook a testament to the future. As Adrienne left, she glanced at the city skyline, its lights a constellation of hope. The Carter Mandate was law in some places, a fight in others, but its spirit was unstoppable. She hadn't set out to be a symbol, only to do her job. But somewhere along the way, standing her ground had become permission for others to rise. In the quiet of her car, Adrienne touched her bare scalp, no longer a scar, but a crown. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey, and Adrienne Carter was leading the way.